Hello, everyone, and welcome to the What's Your Everest podcast. My name is Liam Hubbard, and I'm a senior undergrad student at Northwestern University studying human development and journalism. Today, we're back for part two with certified mental performance consultant Dan Wilsea to break down performance anxiety, discuss what it is, and how to overcome it. So, Dan, thank you so much for joining the show. And Carla, our co host, is on the screen now. Hi, Carla.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Carla Steingraber, and I'm a licensed clinical and sports psychologist, a certified mental game coach. And I just wrote my second book. It's available on Amazon. It's called Growth Mindset for Teens, as well as my first book, What's Your Everest? I have a practice in Northbrook and even have expanded recently to include all kinds of other clinicians, ranging from nutrition and chiropractic care, as well as personal training and massage. I see clients both virtually and in person.
Dan, to start us off talking about performance anxiety today, can you give us a sense of what performance anxiety is? How would you define that? And how is it different just from typical pre performance nerves?
Good question. I think performance anxiety sort of runs a pretty big gambit. The idea, right, of like you could be or be experiencing performance anxiety before an exam as a student athlete, or just a student. And then on the other side, right, is like you're thinking about a performance about a competition, whether that competition is like a regional or national championship, divisionals, or right, is performance anxiety related to your rec league, final in indoor soccer. I think what comes to mind for me related to the definition or how I would define performance anxiety is any sort of impairment before a big quotes in that big event, right? And the idea that that event can be anything. Earlier I was kind of listening to Carla chat a little bit about her theater production that she's directing, right? And we might have some people who are experiencing that sort of like classic stage fright, right? That piece of performance anxiety about going on the stage or something like that. So yeah, I think performance anxiety really runs the gambit of what the actual event is and how that anxiety then is perceived by the individual.
Is it at all different from typical pre performance nerves?
Whew. I would say, right, when I think about anxiety, we typically think of anxiety in the debilitative side of anxiety, the anxiety or the worry or the stress that is tanking, harming, being debilitative, right, to our performance, to our outcome. Right, it's causing us to be a little bit too activated, too emotional. The side that we don't really talk about, or other people don't talk about. I certainly talk about it as a psychology professional in the sport sphere, is the facilitative side of anxiety. Those
Mm.
nerves that are hyping us up, right, before a big event. That kind of like energy where we might be bouncing a little bit in that start corral for a race, right? Or we're on the soccer pitch, and we're looking at our teammates and we're like, ready. We're waiting for the ref to toot that whistle because we are so primed up and ready that we just want to get into it. And so I think the big piece becomes when we talk about harmful or anxiety, it's it's really, right. We're talking about the debilitative kind of anxiety that's pulling our focus, decreasing our motivation, distracting us. But the other side of it, that facilitative side, is actually what helps us get into that performance mindset.
What are the biggest causes then of performance anxiety?
I think one of the biggest ones that I think about sort of straight away, right, is worry about the future, right? That part of like the negative self-talk, perhaps, we're not going to win. I'm not going to be able to perform. This other person across from me is humongous, strong, and I'm not going to be able to, right, defend them, guard them. My talents aren't as good. I'm not as tall as they are. So there's all of this anticipatory sort of worry or negative self-talk or anxious self-talk in our mind that gets us out of the present, the here and now. And even if we're thinking 1 second, 5 seconds, 30 seconds in the future, that is one of the biggest things that leads to that performance anxiety. We're trying to predict the future.
Yeah.
That totally makes sense. And I'm curious, how might parents and coaches change their behavior to reduce unintentionally causing or adding to performance anxiety in their
Mm.
athletes?
Such a great question. I mean, I think anytime that we talk about youth sports athletes, is you have to also include conversations centered around their environment, their coaching environment, their home environment. And one of the biggest takeaways that I see and try to implement with the teams that I work with is the sort of like wraparound care piece with educating parents, coaches about athlete expectations. The idea of meeting the athlete where they're at, right? Some athletes really thrive in that sort of what other athletes might term as like an anxious environment, that sort of like high stakes all the time. And some athletes really enjoy that, and other ones that debilitates their performance. And so it becomes meeting the individual athlete where they're at. And that for me is educating coaches about what they see, right? What athletes do you notice that really thrive in the environment of that pressure? What athletes do you notice that maybe need to be pulled back from that and have something sort of on the side? And I think being able to educate parents related to how they sort of talk about sports at home, or one of the biggest things that I try to have for a lot of my athletes is that car ride home. Car ride home, we're not we're not dissecting the game. We're not dissecting the performance. We're just
Mm-hmm.
enjoying the ride, right? Listening to music, chatting about maybe our post workout nourishment plans, right? Where are we going to stop and get some food? What are we doing after this? Um, but that car ride home sort of is the sacred kind of like safe space I want for my athletes. And it gives everyone who's in the car time to process the performance, good, bad, or otherwise.
I love that. I think that can be so helpful for any parents listening out there. As someone who was an athlete growing up in middle school and high school, I can definitely attest to having that sacred space in the car ride, as you mentioned, can be so
Yeah.
essential. And what strategies do you find most effective for helping athletes with performance anxiety?
The first one that comes to my mind is breathing, right? That I'm a big proponent of breath awareness to bring us back into the present. And certainly one of my most favorite breathing exercise pieces is, whether you're calling it a circle breath or a square breath or a complete breath, um, wherever the nomenclature is, right? Thinking about 4 counts in through your nose, holding for 4, exhaling through your mouth for 4, and then pausing for 4. That's one of my go-tos. And then I also like to sprinkle in the kinesthetic awareness of with our hands, right? Because I'll have athletes sync up that breathing to touching their fingers as they're breathing, which helps that mindfulness component. It also brings in some of the other senses, right? We're able to look and see. And a lot of times before I give a cue, I'll just sort of have an athlete start to do that. And a lot of times, right, this is how they start.
What about
And
like,
be and being able to cue them, right, of like, all right, I see
Mhm.
what's going on there. And right now let's think about being intentional with our breath and just being able to watch their fingers, and then also having them be clued in to that next piece of awareness of like, oh, like I just saw that slow down, and now what do I feel? Right. And so that's certainly one of my frontline modalities is always the breathing piece. Um, a few other elements. I love a good 5 things, right? The using the 5 senses. What are 5 things you can see, right? 4 things you can hear, and working our way down from there. And depending on the environment, I might switch the order up from there. But that also is one of my go-to favorites, um, related to just like bringing that performance anxiety out of out of here and having them really focus on some body awareness.
I love
Yeah,
it.
that awareness piece is really huge. I mean, people very often don't realize that they're breathing very shallowly or that they're holding their breath or how much tension they're holding. So
Hmm.
it's incredible when they can start to notice some of these things actually happening in their body and they have some options of how to deal with it. Anything you can say about treating performance anxiety and how that works if you actually notice there are also some clinical issues that are outside of sport that might be contributing to their anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, I think thinking back to a few student athletes I see now is it's interesting to sort of see what the pattern of like school is, right? Are they in midterms, finals, where are they sort of in that like exam kind of format? And the idea of like some of that performance anxiety related to tests, quizzes, presentations, and how that sometimes presents on their field or in their sport. And then other times on the more sort of like clinical side, if that anxiety is a bit more pervasive, it's one of those experiences where a lot of the times with my athletes is their performance is sort of the first place where they notice that they are anxious, and that piece of anxiety doesn't just subside or go away when they're not doing their chosen sport. And so there's an opportunity where we'll have some conversations related to like, how long do you feel like this has been impacting your performance, right? What are some other things that you notice? And then being able to sort of assess for those boxes, right? Of like, is it social, right? Does it occur in those social settings? Is it at home, right? Is it out in the community, right? Where are these experiences, and how pervasive is that anxiety? But again, it's one of the things I love about working with athletes is most of the time they're going to pick up on, my performance is different, and then they're curious about why.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. What's your Everest? We all have a mountain we're trying to climb. My book here, What's Your Everest? How to Win in Sports, Career, and Life While Enjoying the Ascent, is here to help you with your journey to the top while enjoying the climb. It's written for both teens and adults who are looking to grow, push themselves, and believe bigger. It's available on Amazon. And if you find this book is helpful to you, even with one step up the mountain, I'd truly be grateful for your review. Keep climbing. You've got this.
What about if somebody has really dedicated themselves to some of these techniques and they haven't really seen a difference then?
I think there's always other opportunities, right? And some of the strategies are going to have people more bought in straight away. Others might not. And that's the nice part about us as sports psychology practitioners and clinicians as well, is there's always another tool. There's always
Mhm.
something else we can try. Which I think sometimes we have to get creative and use some out of the box thinking. But the idea that the work that we do isn't one size fits all. We have to, again, be able to meet the athlete where they're at and sort of say like, what works and how can we enhance it working for you.
In that sense, is there a big difference in terms of how performance anxiety presents itself or the tools that you would use with, say, youth athletes versus maybe college athletes or professional athletes? Or is it just sort of, presenting it differently according to their capacity?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the latter, right? It's
Hmm.
more of how you present the skills. Um, I think about with my younger it youth sports athletes, it becomes part of that like awareness piece of the the mind and the body sort of separate at times, right? Like we need to be able to like notice what's happening in our body, and then we can start to layer in some of like the breathing techniques, and then being curious about like, okay, what did you notice? Oh, I feel like calmer now, right? I feel a little sleepy, right? I'm a bit more relaxed, right? Less muscle tension. I think as you move up sort of the athlete chain from there, right, entering into high school, those athletes have a lot more kinesthetic awareness of their body. So you can use bigger terms or a bit more of like these gross motor skills to incorporate with what they're doing. And then college and professional level athletes, right? They have a tremendous understanding of their body in space and how their body works. And so it really just becomes fine tuning some of the points. Like, what do you notice in this exact moment? What do you notice in between each individual rep that you're doing? Right. And that is where some of the work becomes where I think about the younger athletes, it's a bigger lens. And as each individual
Mm-hmm.
athlete, skill level wise, right, as it moves up, it becomes we're looking at things with a magnifying glass to a microscope.
That's really interesting, and that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious for you, Dan, how has your understanding of performance anxiety evolved from when you started your career in mental performance to now?
I think it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about the different forms of anxiety. Right? Like in the beginning, being a clinician and entering the sports psychology world, it was like anxiety is debilitative, right? There might not necessarily be a lot of cases where anxiety is good or helpful for us. But over time, and being around athletes and being in the field, you realize the good anxiety is everywhere, and it becomes how we talk about it and how we look at it. And then also, right, not only for me, but giving the athletes, the exercisers, the performers I work with to be able to term it that this is that good anxiety. Right? That's why I
Yeah.
feel this way before I have this competition or before I get into the starting blocks. That's what I need. Ooh, yeah. And so that I think was the biggest sort of like a light bulb moment for me is like this blanket term we throw on it of anxiety becomes what are we actually talking about?
I really like that. I've never personally really considered that perspective before of let's switch the conversation about performance anxiety instead of say looking at it, okay, how do we make this bad thing a little bit less bad? What if this thing can be helpful? And it sounds like that is something really useful for the athletes you work with. And I'd like to transition into a slightly broader topic, looking at ASP, the Association for Applied Sports Psychology, which is,
Mm-hmm.
of course, integral to the sports psychology world. And for listeners who are unfamiliar, can you explain what ASP is?
Yeah. So the Association for Applied Sports Psychology, or ASP, is a national, now international, now that they've teamed up with the Canadian Sport Psychology Professional Organization. So
Maybe
now it's
just
a
North American.
so now it's this North American side of things, and it is the only like credentialed certification that's recognized in North America, and that credential, that certification is the Certified Mental Performance Consultant, or the CMPC. And ASP is sort of the all things, all knowing sort of embodiment of sport psychology, sport exercise and performance psychology, and it's integral to what we do as sports psychology providers. And it has its set of ethics, its guidelines, its educational standards, and then a exam that all potential CMPCs have to take and pass to have that credential.
What are your thoughts on why it might be important for aspiring sports psychologists to get involved with ASP?
I mean, I think because ASP is the organization, being part
Mm.
of it, even well before you're eligible or ready to take the CMPC, I think it's a great place to be a member, be a part of. Like you can be a member of ASP without being a CMPC. and and so the idea of like giving in with the organization, being an affiliate member or a student member, and the idea is you get to have access to the journals, the communication, the webinars, all of this good material that is helping you like learn, grow, and develop, as well as have a place where you can network with fellow members and CMPCs for things like our mentored hours and all those things like you need to work for to be part of the organization.
Yeah, I definitely can attest to that there are so many things that you get to benefit from because there's usually a listserv in these types of
Mhm.
organizations that keeps you abreast of changes in the field, changes that might be happening with licensing and things like that, as you mentioned, the relevant webinars. So often as people get further away from their training, they don't do as much reading or research, they don't do as much consultation. And really, when you're part of an organization like this, you do stay abreast of all this information and you do have a cohort of people to lean on when you do have other questions. Are there other ways that you think ASP has been helpful to you throughout your career?
I think it's always given me really great access to individuals, like you mentioned earlier, like through the listserv, um, also the annual meeting, the convention.
Yeah.
That's certainly a fantastic place to meet up and chat and catch up with our fellow peers in the sport, exercise, performance sphere. Certainly another thing that ASP is, in my opinion, right, is like they have that career center page, right, where you can like post a resume or like look for jobs that are tailored sort of to the sports psychology population, CMPCs, if you will. I think that's a tremendous resource. Being able to have a spot where you can go and look for jobs that are really like focused on the work that we do. Um, yeah.
Wonderful.
And Dan, going back to performance anxiety, where do you think the sports psychology field collectively has room to grow and how clinicians across the sports psychology world tend to approach treating performance anxiety?
I mean, again, I think because performance anxiety is such a large like term, is each individual kind of like area of service is going to like treat it perhaps or view it differently. All right, like if we're thinking about just throwing out some populations that sports psychology practitioners work with, right? Like certainly we've chatted a lot about athletes today. Um, then you also have performers, right? Musicians, actors, theater performers, right? Vocalists. Then we have our tactical population. Then we have business professional population, exercise population, and performance anxiety is going to look different in some of their presentations, right? In some of those very specific markets of service, but also overall performance anxiety is going to look pretty similar as well.
Mhm.
And so when we think about how or where practitioners are viewing it or how they're treating it, I think it's what lens of like treatment modality they utilize, right? Whether they're cognitive behaviorally informed, right? ACT, CBT, a bit more like solutions focused, psychodynamic. Right? Everyone's
Mhm.
going to have a different approach for how they really like dive in and do the work. So that's a section of it. And then, like I said a second ago, right? It also has to do with what the actual population is and what the performance anxiety sort of looks like for each of those.
Yeah, you can really come across quite a diversity of presentations for sure. Yeah. Well, tell us, Dan, right now, what's on the horizon for you? What's your next Everest?
Whew, what's on the horizon right now? Uh, well, currently working on getting a couple submissions in for ASP. Got to get those in by March 2nd, and February being a short month is coming up pretty quick.
Yeah.
So couple submissions for that. Working on a couple edited book chapters with a couple other colleagues. Putting together a sport exercise and performance sort of proposal for a couple other groups. So I don't know if I have one Everest. I think I'm working on a couple.
Yeah.
Working my way from base camp to mid mountain to the summit.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a blast to be here with you all, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. For our listeners, we appreciate you tuning in and getting to the end of our episode with CMPC Dan Wilsea. Dan, it is wonderful to see you as always.
Thank you so much.